Hey guys, it's Michael from the Homestead, and in today's video I want to talk about something that has been on our minds lately, and that is, can you raise chicks and goslings in the same brooder? Now before we get started, make sure to subscribe to this channel and you click on the little alert button so you get notified when we publish more videos like this. A couple of weeks ago we decided to get a batch of new chicks because our existing laying hens are in their second year and their egg production is slowly going down, so we needed more. And so we got a bunch of new chicks, 25 actually, and unfortunately a few died, some in transit, some within the first 24 hours. So we had to go to Tractor Supply and get some more chicks. And when we were there, we saw ducks or ducklings. And I'm like, oh, these are really cute. And you know, I had ducks when I was a kid, and so I really wanted to have ducks again. But my wife wasn't really on board with it yet. But then, over the next few days, we realized, well, we don't want to have another rooster for our second flock because roosters can be a bit of a pain. They can be aggressive, especially with the kids. And so we considered the idea of a guard goose. But instead of just getting one, I'm like, no, we want to get two, so at least I have a buddy. We don't want to raise any, herd animal individually. I generally think that's not a good idea with any breed that is used to being in a herd. And so, Tractor Supply, they also had goslings. And so the question came up, can you raise them in the same brooder? Because there's obviously a size difference. There might be a difference in terms of what they eat, how they drink water, etc. And we decided to do some research, give it a try. And so in this video, I'll share with you not only what we've learned, but also what we've seen with running 25 chicks and 2 African goslings in the same brooder, and then later on in the same chicken tractor that they're in right now before they move into their final home. And one of the most obvious differences between chicks and goslings is their size. Even from the get-go, goslings are significantly bigger, and they might even grow at a different rate depending on the breed of geese that you get. But they're obviously, a size difference. And so one of the things that we noticed initially was that the goslings seem to be relatively clumsy, or at least not very considerate of their bigger size and heavier weight in comparison to the chicks. So sometimes they would just, run into one direction and run over the chicks. And it took them a few days to figure out, okay, how, the mechanic works and that they're simply much bigger and they have to be more careful. And within a day or so, that has not been an issue. So size difference hasn't really been a big deal. We are now 3-4 weeks in. They've been together the entire time and they are perfectly fine. They, don't run over each other. They sleep together. They cuddle up together. And so there doesn't seem to be any issue in terms of size. But in the beginning, you might want to be careful and just see how they interact and play out. Speaking of, interacting, in the beginning, one of the goslings was kind of bullying the chicks. So the gosling didn't want any chick close by. He would, or she actually would run after the chicks and chase them away and pinch them. That also only lasted for a day. So your, experience might be different depending on the exact breed, how aggressive that breed is, how, the character of the individual gosling might make a difference. But we have noticed that typically within a couple of hours, we noticed a significant change in behavior and how they would interact after about one day, where they, stopped pecking at each other and stopped exploring each other and kind of trying to see, who are you? You look different. And they are perfectly fine now. They are very nice with each other. They sleep together under the same heating plate. Sometimes, when they sunbathe or dust bathe, they do it right next to each other. They seem to be getting along very well without any issues whatsoever. One thing in terms of feeding, chicks are insectivores. They are kind of insect-leaning omnivores, I want to say. They can certainly eat a lot of things, but they need supplemental feed, typically starter feed with chicks. With goslings, they can have the same feed, but geese really thrive on pasture. In fact, if you have grass, if you have pasture, you don't need to feed your geese. And so what we've done with ours is we have moved them from the beginning, really. We've taken them out and put them on pasture for a couple of hours, even in the first 2 weeks. And we saw the geese eating predominantly grass and pretty much ignoring the starter feed that the chicks were all over. And at about I think at week 2 or so, maybe week 3, we moved them out into a mobile chicken tractor, and they've been out there on pasture. So it's a chicken tractor, you know, without a flooring or anything. So they are directly on the grass, and the geese or the goslings thrive eating grass. Occasionally they would go to the feed, but most of their diet consists of grass. So from a feeding perspective, while you can feed them the same starter feed in the beginning, if you can put them on pasture, you not only cut down on your feed cost, but you also provide the more appropriate diet for your goslings. So that's a consideration if you raise them together. Ideally, you want to put them on pasture if you can. In our case, we just put all the 27 birds on pasture. They all love it, even though the chicks use the pasture less of a food source, whereas the goslings very much do. In terms of water, it's a kind of a different story. I mean, yes, both drink the same water, obviously, but the type of water that you use might have to be a little bit different than if you only had chicks. Now, in the beginning, we had those tiny, chick waters that, where they cannot drown and still drink, etc. And they worked in the beginning, but we saw from very early on that, just because of the different beak size, the goslings have, bigger, longer beaks, and they try to dive in a little bit and then, get some water and then drink it, tilting their head back. The chicks drink differently. They also put up their head, but since the beak is so much smaller, they have an easier time getting into that small lip, of those chick feeders. So we had to increase or change the watering source fairly quickly so that the goslings can really dive in and drink as they would in nature. And the older they got, the more they started interacting with the water, playing with the water, using it to clean their beak, especially if they, got some of the chick feed, all that, the crumbles were all over their beak. So they like to really dive in and clean their beaks, clean their eyes, clean their face with the water. And so we have now a 5-gallon duck watering system hanging in our chicken tractor that both the chicks as well as the goslings use. And we have to fill that guy up for those 27 birds, I want to say, once every day, once every 1.5 days, because the geese really like to play with water, get in there, they spill more of that water, they drink more of that water. So they are waterfowl, so they are much more likely to interact with that water. So your watering system might have to be different than if you were to raise only chicks. And the same really applies to ducks, even though ducks tend to be even messier than the geese. So that's one thing to keep in mind. In terms of heating source, we started out with a heating lamp in the beginning and then relatively quickly switched over to a heating plate. And with the heating plate it's height adjustable. You can check out our blog post and YouTube video about the differences between heating lamp and heating plate. But we really like the plate because it's much less of a fire hazard. It doesn't get as hot. Even if something fails and breaks or whatever, you're much less likely to set anything on fire than with a heating lamp, which tends to get really, really hot. And it could also disrupt the circadian rhythm unless you have an infrared lamp for night. So to, give them complete darkness as, those birds would experience in nature. With a heating plate, there is no light source and it's a very consistent heat. And we have a fairly large plate, so all the 27 birds could get under. Now, at some point, we realized that the height adjustment, is limited of the heating plate. And the bigger those geese grow, the less likely they might be to actually get underneath and enjoy the heating plate. But in reality, we are now in July here in Georgia. It's super hot, and at week 3, we took the heat source completely away. They've been spending day and night outside, completely fine, no issues whatsoever. So that wasn't a problem. But if you're raising the birds in colder temperatures, maybe in early spring or in late fall or whatever, the heat source might be an important consideration. You might be better off, depending on how long, you have that heat source in the brooder, with a lamp versus then a plate, which has limits in terms of how high you can set it up for the geese to get underneath. And, if it's super high, then obviously it might be too far away from the chicks that are much, much smaller than the geese. So that's another consideration to take into account. In terms of waste management, maintenance, sanitation, chicks, I thought the chickens poop a lot. But in comparison to geese, chicks are incredibly clean, really, or at least they don't produce as much waste. We have to move the chicken tractor sometimes twice a day because the geese just poop all over it. The entire inside of the tractor, that patch of lawn where the tractor is covered in geese poop or in gosling poop within a couple of hours, whereas the chicken poop is significantly smaller and less noticeable. And so, that also makes a difference. The more geese you have, the more often you might have, and the same applies to ducks, the more often you might have to change, the bedding material, unless you use a deep littering method, or you have to move the tractor more often if you have them outside like we do. So those are some of the considerations, but generally speaking, there is nothing wrong with raising those types of birds together in the same brooder, chicks, goslings, ducklings, whatever. They all can coexist. They usually play nice. There might be some initial squabble and some pecking going on as they maybe establish their pecking order, even between those different breeds. But it usually subsides within a few days. It has, in our case, within the first 24 hours. They seem to be completely fine. They get along. They love each other, it seems like. And it's been not a problem at all. And we'll probably do it again if the need arises. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, let us know in the comments what you could have done better. Until next time.